Good afternoon, everyone. Looks like this is the right size, so I don't get to do the cool God mode thing. Thanks for having me. I'm here to talk about editing content on the web and a tool that I built to help do that called Quill. So first, a little bit of background. It kind of started 3 years ago when I started a company. We were trying to build a collaborative editor a lot like Google Docs. And so people can type simultaneously. You can work together simultaneously on the same document. So a big part of that, of course, is the editor. And so when we started, we had seen other editors on the web. We had used the web for a long time. And so we figured we could just reuse one of those, possibly an open source one, and just add collaboration on top of it. So we didn't expect to find anything out of the box that would just work, but we had hoped that we could be able to extend it so that we didn't have to write everything from scratch. The big problem was that we encountered that these editors didn't have anything that resembled an API. When it did have kind of an API page in their documentation, when you look at kind of the methods and what they offered, it basically was the DOM API. So for example, if you wanted to get content from these editors, they gave you the content in the form of HTML, which you could already do with inner HTML. And if you wanted to change any part of the document, you either had to parse and figure out which part of that you wanted to change, or the methods that they gave you just set the entire document. So at least for our purposes, you couldn't just, if you're typing long and other people are typing long and you're resetting the document on every keystroke, that just wasn't really going to work out for us. And this kind of is a bigger problem, that the fact that it didn't have an API means that kind of the offerings out there were just, the offerings out there was what you got. If you couldn't extend on those offerings, then you couldn't really improve upon the editing experience, and you're limited to basically the imaginations of the people that built those products. So we started working on Quill to solve that problem, and a key thing was that we wanted to design Quill so it could be a drop-in replacement as a rich text editor, but it also needed to feature an API that allowed you to customize its behavior and allow you to extend upon it, so you could build something that we didn't really think about. And so that's what I'll talk mostly about today. So before I get started and do demonstrations of the API, the things that we wanted to keep in mind when we were building it were we wanted it to be very simple. That's something, of course, desirable in any API. For Quill specifically, it meant that the content that you got, the data that you were working with was much simpler than HTML. If you had to start parsing the content yourself, then that's a non-starter. We wanted it to be very powerful, which helps with the simplicity, because if you could just do whatever you want, and then that's a very simple interface. But also for Quill specifically, that means you should be able to change the content whenever you want, wherever you want. You could change a subset of the document. You could change any part of it, not just where the cursor is, not just the entire document. And of course, we wanted to be evented, because any good API has events. So I'm going to switch to Quill to show you. Okay, that is, crap. Okay, see, I kind of had a feeling that, where's my mouse? Okay, had a feeling that would happen, so I have a backup. Okay. Okay, so basically, it looks like a rich text editor that you can type into it. You can apply formatting. So it does all the things that you want from an editor. But what we want to focus more on is the API. And basically, this is the documentation page for Quill, quilljs.com. And we've exposed a global variable that you can basically try out any of these methods on the on the main editor. So before I do that, I'll just go over some of those methods. Okay, we're back to this. Okay, so first part, retrieving the content. So like I said, we don't want you to have to deal with HTML. So there's a few ways you can get content. There's get text, which is just plain text. Get content, which is basically an array of the content that I'll just show more in the demonstration. And then get selection, where you can basically, this will return an index, a range that is an index into the editor, not, if you're familiar with the DOM API, it would have given you an HTML element with an offset from that. So this kind of frees you from having to parse that yourself and figure out where in the place of the document that is. Okay, so let's go back to the, okay, all right, we are back. Okay, so to start off with get text, Okay, so you can see this is basically just the plain text output of Quill. Oh man, I should have done that God mode thing because it looks like the bottom. Okay, I do have to do the sign? Okay, awesome. I think it's not, am I doing it wrong? I mean, that looks good enough. Okay. Okay, we'll go with that. Okay. Okay. All right, so the more interesting one is probably get contents. And actually, I'll just, you can set an index if you want. This is overloaded, so this is the first 60 characters. We would have designed it to return just an array, but we wanted to add functionality to this object, so it's, we didn't think inheriting from array has its own issues. So basically, there's one object that is an array. And so you can see, oh boy. The text is just Quill rich text editor. And then there's an attributes object that says it's 18-point font. The next object is the text that I typed with plain text. And open source, which has this attribute link. So, okay, so let's take a look at a demonstration of this. So here, okay, I won't push refresh because I might screw things up. Okay, so this is basically, let's assume this will be demonstrating get content, and basically I'm going to be able to type into this 5 and oh boy. Okay, and so you can see it actually generates Markdown. So if I were writing Lord of the Rings, I would say, okay, and Dahlia was this. Okay, so that's how I would have wrote Lord of the Rings and save a lot of trouble for everyone. So if you bold, if you apply formatting, it does it produces the right markup. And since I'm such a nice person, I might even add a link for if you didn't know who the Eagles were. Well, this is the wrong link, but just to demonstrate that it does generate the right syntax. So this is basically using the Quill get contents API call. It's incredibly simple. Oops. Okay, I did the demo already. This is basically the meat of that demo. And all it does is you get the contents, you loop through it, and when you encounter an interesting or an attribute, then you just apply you apply the kind of the markup to produce Markdown. And so this is maybe, there are only 2 here, but you can kind of add the other features that Markdown supports. And this is an incredibly simple function because you didn't have to, all of the interpreting what the contents of the editor was already done for you. So once that is done, you can take it and do whatever you want with it. So that's just one example with doing that with Markdown. Okay. So next I'll talk about modifying content. So there's 3 main functions for that. You can insert text, delete text, and format text. And all 3 of these, I think the API is pretty intuitive, and I'll just demonstrate them in this. All right, I'm going to go with a different one here. Okay, so for example, if I want to do quill.insert text on the 6th position, JavaScript. So this inserts a text, and since I didn't say that it was formatted, it inserts plain text, so I can go ahead and format that. Okay, so it formats that, and then I can also delete it. Ugh. And if I were to have done the insertion correctly the first time, this would be what it does. Okay, so pretty simple API. I'll just go into another example of what you can do. A lot of people use Quill as kind of adding messaging to their app, and messaging or email, they want to add email functionality, and it's not the core part of their app, but it's something that they want to add and not necessarily have to focus on. Okay. Okay, so I guess, well, the part that I want to focus on is you've probably all seen that pretty much every editor has the same link tooltip that allows you to edit the link. But here, because you're the one that gets to format the text, and you don't have to, that means you can basically, you're the one that gets to set it at the end. You don't have to use somebody else's. You can switch out the link tooltip and use your own interface. So for example, here, maybe most of the time when you're trying to link something, maybe you just want a Google search, and a lot of times that's the link that you want, or that's the URL that you want. So here, this is kind of an example of how you can modify the behavior and modify the editing experience that isn't necessarily bound to what somebody else had decided was the best link tooltip. And this may not, I guess the point here isn't that this is a better interface, but the fact is that you can, because Quill has an API, you can invent new interfaces, try those, and if they may be better than the ones that are already provided. So the point is that you can extend this, and you can change the editing experience, and you can push the boundaries to make better editing products. Okay, thanks. Okay, so okay, so last thing I'll cover is events. Basically, there are 2 events. You can figure out when the selection change happens or text change happens. And I will go back to actually, okay. Okay, so this just registers a handler, and now if I change the selection, it'll basically tell you that it's changed. When it's a cursor, it's the same number, and when it's different, it gets the whole range. And when you lose focus, it's null. So so that selection change. Text change is very similar. Now I'll just go to the last demo, which is actually one of my favorite use cases of Quill, because it's kind of a use case which getting back to the reason why we built it was it gets to something that we didn't really think about it gets to an interface that we didn't really think about when we were building the editor, but because we made it extensible, it's something that it was able to be molded into that. So there's this interesting group at Stanford that's doing some work on translations. It's kind of interdisciplinary between the hard science of translations, but then also user interfaces. If you've used translation services, you know that machines aren't perfect at it, so you still need a human involved. So they're doing work to bridge the gap between the two from a usability perspective. So this is a demo of what the functionality that they've built. So immediately, what it does is it's essentially autocomplete for translations. So this is the text that a translator would potentially have to translate, and here is the machine's best guess. And so it's relatively good. The guesses are relatively good, but sometimes when it's a little less sure, it'll present a few options, and in this case, it's not actually correct, or this is perhaps a better translation, and then you can kind of accept the rest. So again, that was something that we didn't design for. When we built Quill, we didn't think about ways to improve the experience for a translator. But this is something that you could build. And I guess the main point of Quill is its API, and it's able to do this because it has one. And so to conclude, I kind of want to step back from Quill specifically and talk about APIs in general. If you think about products and everything as a graph, then if you just offer something without an API, it's essentially a terminal node. That's all you're going to get. But if you offer an API, then it could be part of a larger offering, and it could spawn many more products and many more ideas. So when you're building kind of those products and services, I encourage you to think about that. If you want your offering to be kind of that's all the offering is, or if you want to kind of open the doors for something else that you didn't think about. So that's all I have. Thank you for listening.